Talk about a blockbuster. Laremy Tunsil, one of the best pass blockers in the NFL, has been traded to the Washington Commanders for a lot of draft picks. Laremy Tunsil will be the new blindside bully for Kliff Kingsbury's Washington offense and Jaden Daniels' new best friend. Tunsil was the missing piece in that Commanders offense. And in this video, we're going to discuss maybe why the Texans decided to let go of Tunsil and why the Commanders wanted him so badly. The deal, it's a big one. A 2026 second rounder, a 2026 fourth rounder, a 2025 third rounder, and a 2025 seventh for Laremy Tunsil, and a 2025 fourth round pick. So, to put that in common English, it's a second and a third with an added seventh for Laremy Tunsil. It's a swap of fourth round picks, and you could even say that the seventh is the cost from a fourth this year and a fourth next year. So it's basically a second next year and a third this year for Laremy Tunsil. Now, Tunsil does carry a pretty hefty contract. He's one of the highest paid tackles in football, but he's one of the best. He's proven that. Multiple teams, multiple systems, multiple coaching staffs. He's proven he's one of the best left tackles in the league, especially when it comes to protecting the passer. He's a premier pass blocker. Last year, 5th in pass blocking grade. Okay, 5th. He also was one of the most efficient pass blockers last year. And in terms of his PFF stats, they list him with 2 sacks allowed, only 3 hits allowed, 14 hurries, and 19 pressures. Now, that's pretty good when you consider the fact that Tunsil played on arguably the worst offensive line in football. The other thing to consider is that despite earlier in his career missing a couple games per season, playing about 14 games on average, 2 of the last 3 years he's played 17 games, all 17. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler, so he is heavy accolades. Former first-round pick, a guy that fell in the draft, you might remember because of the gas mask situation, but he would have been like, I want to say a top 5, top 10 pick. I don't exactly remember where he got drafted. Actually, let me look. But he's been basically what he was billed as. 13th overall pick in 2016. He's been in the NFL for quite some time. He's going to be 31 before the kickoff of the 2025 NFL season. But this is a guy that's been great pretty much from the jump. Okay? And last year, overall, according to PFF, he was one of the best tackles in football as the 19th overall tackle in the NFL. Now, pass blocking wise, like I said, 5th. He's had always lower run blocking grades. He's been a less effective and efficient run blocker than pass blocker. But that's okay, especially in a system in Washington where they're going to drop back a ton. They're going to throw a ton. Daniels going to have the ball in his hands 40 times a game. It's Daniels running. It's Daniels throwing. It's quick screens, right? It's RPOs. It's the quick game. So a lot of passes. They use the passing game as an extension of the running game. So for Tunsil, he's actually going to be able to take a lot of plays off. And then if the Commanders want to go to more drop back passes, this really helps them. And having a great left tackle does so much for your team because it allows you to scheme around the weaknesses of your offensive line. You know you now have a guy that can go one-on-one with the best pass rushers on that side at all times. Now you can scheme around the rest of your line. For the Texans, they found out that didn't exactly work out for them last year because their interior was so bad that it didn't matter. Teams were just focusing on that interior and getting after it. But when it comes to helping your right tackle, you're able to do that with a great left tackle. So you're able to chip and do some things and put the back to that side. So you're going to have consistency to your offense with having a great left tackle. Okay. When you look at his career from a grading standpoint, he's always graded around the 20th best tackle in football, his best season being 2022 at 11th. Okay. So he's always been seen in the eyes of a grading PFF as a very good player, but never like an elite player. But when you always look at his pass blocking stats, he's always been one of the best. So it's kind of interesting that way when you look at him, just because he's not the most well-rounded, but when it comes to the most important area, he's one of the best. If not, at times he's been the best. So last year in 2023, he was literally the second best pass blocker in the NFL according to PFF. The second best, only behind Tyron Smith. In 2022, which was graded as his best season in the NFL, he was the best pass blocker in football, the highest pass blocking grade in football. He only allowed 1 sack, 17 pressures, 3 hits, and 13 hurries. Another thing with him, just interestingly, is that he played with Deshaun Watson. So the reason I bring that up is the quarterback run stuff. I don't think will be too unfamiliar for him dealing with Jaden Daniels and dealing with a mobile quarterback. Right? So that's something that also I think is a little bit useful. Not a huge deal, but a little bit useful. I think the reason the Texans traded him, if you're wondering, Commanders fans, like, why did they trade him? And Texans fans are probably wondering, why did we trade him? I think it's because their O-line was so bad despite having this player on their O-line. I really think that's what it was. I think they want to kind of do a minimal weakness approach. So from here on out, they're going to use all that capital, the second, the third, the seventh, the fourth, all that stuff in order to build an entire offensive line. They have so many holes. Center, guards, right tackle, left tackle now, that they need to fulfill it, build it through the draft for CJ Stroud. This year, it's probably going to be pretty rough, but it can't be much worse than it was last year if you're the Houston Texans, right? And now they have a new offensive coordinator. Maybe they felt like the new offensive coordinator as well, Tunsil wasn't the best overall fit. Now, that's hard to believe because Tunsil is like one of the best tackles in the league, but maybe they wanted more physicality, right? More power blocking scheme with Nick Caley in there, being a former Patriot guy, a little bit more Ram influenced as of late, more gap scheme with the Rams. So perhaps leaning away from zone scheme and more gap. That's also a reason why the Texans lean towards, moving off of him. And maybe he wasn't quite as valuable because his run blocking isn't the biggest asset in his game. And they want to be run focused in Houston. So that's perhaps part of it, right? But, I'm trying to just find reasons. At the same time, it fits Washington perfectly because, like I said, their volume in their passing game is going to be extremely high. They don't want to be running the ball that much. They want to have a quick game passing game, right? So I am disappointed that Washington let De'Ami Brown leave, though. They did bring in Debo, so there's going to be a lot of screens, a lot of RPOs. You know that. They have Terry McLaurin. We'll see what they do with the rest of their receiving core and their backfield. But Tunsil's a huge get. In my opinion, it eliminates one of their weaknesses, which to me was like an average offensive line, a suspect offensive line at times, right? You look at their offensive line now, and there's not a lot of weaknesses. And I will say, though, one of the things that I think is interesting is they went to the NFC Championship because of their offense. Did they really feel like this was the best way to use that draft capital? Could they not have used it on a Trey Hendrickson? Could they not have used it on a pass rusher? I would have preferred they would have used it on defense, right? I would have preferred they would have used it on a big-time playmaker in the front seven. But instead, maybe that's the Dan Quinn preference of like, use your assets on offense. I can coach this defense up. I can get the most out of this defense. Maybe that's him putting pressure on himself as a head coach. Maybe that's the advantage of having a defensive head coach. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there. But I would have probably preferred on the surface that they would have added a defensive player. That being said, you now look at their offensive line. Sam Cosmi is really good. Tyler Biadasz is a good football player. Nick Allegretti's solid at left guard. Andrew Wiley is fine at right tackle. Right? Brandon Coleman now slides to the bench. Maybe he'll develop. Maybe he'll become the future right tackle instead of Andrew Wiley. That's interesting. So, and when we compare the grading, so Coleman was 63rd last year. Wiley was 57th. Their two biggest weaknesses on the offensive line. Actually, Cornelius Lucas was graded 28th for them. So he was actually somebody that was a little underrated in terms, but their guards were graded pretty well. So Tunsil does take away one of their biggest weaknesses, which is tackle. And of course, they're in a division with the Eagles. They're in a division with Micah Parsons. They're in a division with Dexter Lawrence, with Brian Burns. So they need good offensive linemen. Okay, you need a good offensive line. That being said, they got to the NFC Championship despite having an average one. I would have wondered what they could do with a better defense. I'm just throwing that out there. For the Texans, I think it's as simple as their offensive line stunk despite having one of the best pass blockers at left tackle in the league. Doesn't really matter that they had him. Plus, he took a lot of penalties last year. I think this was an area that might have gone overlooked, but he had a frustrating amount of penalties last season. Like, it was at the point where it was like, what the heck is this guy doing? Like, it was extremely frustrating last season. I remember watching him and I was like, oh, bro, what is he doing? Like, he's taking so many penalties, right? So, Washington as an overall offensive line, they were actually graded as the second least efficient pass blocking offensive line in football, according to Pro Football Focus. Actually, Houston was graded a little bit higher, which is interesting. So maybe I'm underselling how much they struggled in that regard. But, oh, wait, that was 2022. I'm looking at 2022 stats. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so last season, right, the Commanders were actually the 8th best. There you go. That makes a lot more sense. I was looking at old stats. And then Houston was 22nd. That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I think Tunsil's a really good player. The hope is he stays healthy. He's 31. That's not old for a tackle. I wouldn't worry about the age at all. It's just a lot of draft capital to give up for a team that still has a lot of needs on defense, that's losing some free agents on defense now. Laremy Tunsil signed somewhere else, right? Their corner position's still suspect. Their defensive line's a little suspect. I think their offense is good now, though. They retained Zach Ertz. They got Debo. You kind of want a wide receiver 3. But other than that, your offense looks great on paper, even better than it was last year, adding Debo and Laremy Tunsil. But defensively, that's kind of where something is left to be desired. That being said, one of the best blindside blockers, one of the best pass blockers, one of the best left tackles in football. You can never go wrong with that deal. You really can't. And you didn't have to give up a first-round pick, which is a pretty sweet deal if you're the Washington Commanders, right? Pretty sweet deal if you're the Commanders. That being said, I do wonder if they should have used it in a slightly different way. I also would say for the Texans, I thought, this was going to be the offseason they fixed their offensive line. Maybe they still feel like they can do that. Maybe they'll use some of the cap space on the remaining free agents. Maybe they'll try to piece something together. But I think what Nick Caserio is going to go for moving forward is building the offensive line from scratch, building a cohesive 5 that maybe doesn't have a superstar at any of the 5 spots, but doesn't have a weakness. Because the Texans spent too much money on Tunsil. Maybe that's how they view it. And they didn't have enough money to spend on the other positions. They didn't have enough to make a pure, good, solid 5. And I think the offensive coordinator change also had an influence on it. But Tunsil is in a great spot with the Commanders because this is one of the most pass-heavy teams moving forward in the NFL, thanks to Jaden Daniels and his breakout as a rookie. So those are my thoughts on the move. A lot of draft picks, a lot of capital. Tunsil hopefully can eliminate some of those penalties. You would hope that. But I would also say, looking at last season, for him to play that well with how bad of an offensive line was around him, especially at left guard, speaks to how talented he is, speaks to how gifted he is. So for Commanders fans, you should be extremely pumped. I would just wonder, and I'm kind of intrigued to see what they do with their defense. Gronk, spike the like button, subscribe, check out the BLV Discord if you want to join. It's absolutely free. It's a lot of fun, a lot of crazy NFL fans in there reacting to this news. So make sure to check it out. It's Mitch. Peace.